Please welcome Angela Price.
Hi, my name is Angela Price, and I'm going to show you what you need to upcycle furniture as a beginner and the steps involved in upcycling furniture as a beginner. So as a full-time student, I would sit at my desk for hours, and then I would get up all sore, joints aching, plop on the couch, turn on YouTube and veg for an hour, then go back to my desk. And I was starting to feel really yucky. And one day I saw the furniture flipping teacher, and it was interesting to me. She was flipping furniture to pay off her $27,000 debt, student loan debt. She was doing it part-time while still teaching. I thought, you know, I've been paying my debt as I go, but this looks like fun. I think I'm gonna give it a try. So the first piece of furniture that I did was a piece that I owned, and it turned out terrible because I didn't follow the steps. I didn't use the right products, and so I watched more videos when I would take my break from doing homework, and pretty soon I was able to do stuff that I could sell. To get started, it will cost you as a beginner upcycler of furniture, it will cost about $60. That's to get started with just the basics. And the basics are, you need a bucket or a bowl, some kind of container, Dawn dish soap, which pretty much everybody has because it's a grease cutter, lint-free cloths, a screwdriver, you're going to need sandpaper and a sanding block, wood filler, which you can use your finger, or I have this old spatula, I don't even know what it's off of, which I use. You're going to need paint brushes. You're going to need polyacrylic or polyurethane for your top coat. And if you want to do a wax coat, you're going to need clear wax. I love Magnolia. It's a great wax. It goes on like butter. If you're going to paint your hardware like I painted these, you'll need to get a good spray paint. This is Rust-Oleum nickel color, and that works good for those. You're going to need the paint that you're going to use. You can't use latex paint. It has to be chalk paint or furniture and cabinet paint because latex paint will peel. I use the Walmart wipes in case I have little spills or I get paint somewhere on the furniture that I don't want it. And when you are using the paint, never put your brush in the can, like this can of chalk paint. Never just dip your brush in. Pour some paint in a container because you'll contaminate your chalk paint if you don't do it that way. You can also use a roller. I don't particularly like using rollers because I don't like the texture unless I'm doing a textured product. I just don't like using them, but a lot of people do. You can use a sander instead of sandpaper if you'd like, but you don't have to invest in this. So to first get started, all you need is a paintbrush. This is a $7 paintbrush from Ace Hardware. I like the little shorty brushes because they fit into the palm of your hand better. I use chalk paint brushes. These are the chalk paint brushes. These are natural bristle. Good for the chalk paint because you can just rub them around. For the polyacrylic or polyurethane, you need a nylon brush or you can use a foam brush. And you can also use the foam roller, whichever you want. And if you say, well, I don't really want to use a brush and paint, you can also get chalk paint in spray form or any other kind of furniture paint in spray form. Step one is you need to pick out your furniture. I got this at Goodwill. It was $12. It was like brand new, probably 30 years old, probably sitting in somebody's basement or attic. I didn't have to do any wood filler in it. There was no scratches or dents. The inside is spotless. And so all I did was I got my bucket, poured a little bit of Dawn soap in it with warm water, got my lint-free cloth, and I cleaned it up really good. And well, and I removed the hardware too. And all you need, almost everybody has a Phillips screwdriver. So you need a flathead Phillips screwdriver. If you don't have one, you can get one pretty cheap at any hardware store or even at the dollar store, I've seen them. So I fill it up, I get my warm water in my bucket, and I just wipe it down. You have to wipe it down really good because you want to get the oil and grime. And I mean, if this is a 30-year-old little dresser or nightstand, there's 30 years of dust and grime, and every time you touch something, the oils from your hands get on the furniture. So you have to get that off there, because if you don't get that off there, the paint won't adhere as good. So after I wash it down and then I rinse it with clean water with the lint-free rag, I let it dry for about an hour, because you can't sand right away. You'll dig into your piece if you do that. I get my sandpaper, and you can also get a block. This is a foam block, but you can also buy handheld blocks that even rotate for flat surfaces that work really well. But I just get my sandpaper. This is 120 grit. So the higher grit of sandpaper you use, the more it's going to dig into your piece. And because we just want to scuff sand this, so we don't want to remove varnish or paint. Like on this desk, I stripped all the paint off and then I sanded it completely down because I wanted to refinish the top of that. But with this one, all I did was get my sandpaper and I scuff sand. And that just, you barely have to sand it. You just want to rub it on there. You want to get it roughed up a little so your paint will stick on there. Because if it's a smooth surface, like a lot of these old pieces are, the paint's not going to stick. It's going to peel off. You'll take your fingernail and you can actually peel the paint off, and you want to avoid that. So you have it clean, you have it sanded, it's ready to primer. So there are two different kinds of primers. Water-based, which I don't have a can of that out there, and then there's the oil-based with shellac. This is what I always use, because the water-based, if you put water-based primer over anything that is oil-based, that oil-based is going to come up through the water-based, because that's what oil does. It goes to the surface. Like if you're walking down the road, you'll see in a mud puddle, the oil comes up through the water. So you want to get a good primer. Ben's an excellent primer, and it has shellac, and it's gonna, like if I had a bare piece of wood or some old varnish on there, it's gonna block anything from coming up into my water-based paint, and there won't be bleeding. They call that bleeding when that happens. So if I didn't use a primer on this and there was bleeding, you would see like streaks of red or brown coming up through the paint, and that's no good. Then you have to start all over. So we have our shellac, so we put that on, and you want to try to stay with the grain. You don't have to be extremely careful, but you should try to stay with the grain of your wood when you're putting the primer on. You want to avoid drips. Primer's usually pretty thin, so you really need to take care in, if you paint the top of this, go back, look, is there drips? Get those drips off there, because if you don't get the drips off, then you're going to have to sand it off. So once you get that primer on there, then I scuff sand it again, but this time I use about 300 grit, and I'm just going to sand any rough spots from the primer. You don't want to sand the primer off. You just want to get anything that might have gotten on there. And then you wipe it all down, make sure that's all off. Anytime you sand a piece of furniture, you have to clean it off, wipe it off, and get all that sanding dust off there, because you don't want that in the paint. So that's all done. So then I'm going to get my paint, and I usually always use chalk paint. This is Kills chalk paint. This is really good paint. I use this on here, on this piece. And this was on the mist tint table, And when you go to like Walmart or Lowe's or Home Depot, they always have a misprint table or mistint table. And all that means is somebody bought some paint, they mixed it the wrong color, it may have only been slightly off, and it'll be like half off, sometimes even $5, where this would cost usually $25. So I got this for $12, and this is usually $25. And so I get this and I pour it into my container that I'm going to use to paint with. And I just eyeball it. I guess how much I'm going to use. You stir it up. First you stir it up. You stir it up really good. Then you pour it in here. So after I get my paint in my bowl or my container, if I'm using chalk paint, I would usually use the chalk brush, but oftentimes I just use my plain old brush because I like these little short handled brushes. And I just get paint on the tip. I don't coat my whole paintbrush with the paint because you want to put thin coats on, because you don't want all those paintbrush marks, the stroke marks. So the thinner your paint is, the less you're going to have to deal with the stroke marks. And with the chalk paint, because it's so thick and porous, I also add a little bit of water to my paint in my container. You can also use a spray bottle on your piece or on your paintbrush, but I prefer to just mix a little bit of water in my bowl. That works best for me. So you're gonna have to just experiment and see what works best for you. And I paint it and I watch for drips and then I let it dry. One of the mistakes new painters, upcyclers of furniture make is they don't wait. You have to wait for stuff to dry, because if you don't, you're just gonna rub that first coat off. So be patient, wait, maybe have 2 or 3 projects going at once so you're not chomping at the bit to get to the next thing you need to do. You can wait, you can give it the proper amount of drying times, and that really helps. So after my first coat of paint is on there, I'm going to take my 300 grit sandpaper again, and I'm going to just barely rub it on there. I'm just going to get any little clumps of paint, anything that doesn't feel smooth to the touch. I'm going to get that off there. Then I'm going to take my lint-free cloth and I'm going to get that all off there. All that dust from sanding, you have to get that off there because that will contaminate your paint and it can cause problems for adhesion for the paint. So then I do my second coat of paint. The second coat of paint, you have to be more careful because this is your last layer of paint. So you're going to make sure you go with the wood grain. You're not going to put it on thick. You're going to do, as I said before, and you're going to just put it on the tip of your paintbrush, and you're going to go along the edges and make sure there's no drips. And then you, after you get it all painted, walk away, let it dry. In fact, a lot of times I will let my pieces dry overnight. That way the paint's really dry and I don't have to worry about if I say I wax it or I put polyacrylic on it for a top coat. I don't have to worry about my paint coming off, rubbing off. So once it's dry, then I do my top coat. Some furniture paint has a built-in top coat, so you don't have to do this step, but on my final step, I'll wax it. And with the wax, you just get, I have special waxing brushes. I keep them in a baggie because you really shouldn't mix your painting and waxing brushes because you cannot paint over wax. It doesn't work. If you decide you want something a different color after you wax it, you have to take all the wax off, strip it down, and redo it. So if I'm waxing, I just put that in there, swirl it around, wipe any excess off, and do the whole piece with that. If I'm using polyacrylic or polyurethane, then I take my brush or my foam brush. I usually use a foam brush. And I just spread it on there, let it sit. If it looks weird to you, don't worry about it. That's normal. It will settle It's self-leveling, so if one part looks brush strokey and another part doesn't, don't touch it. Don't try to fix it. Just leave it dry and it usually works itself out. So after I'm all done with that, then I get my hardware, get my screwdriver, and I just put my hardware back on, and I'm done. This is ready to sell if I want to sell it, or ready to put in my house if I want to put it in my house. And another important thing about if you're going to sell furniture is to stage it. You know, stage it to where it looks pretty. Like if you were going to sell this as a nightstand, don't put a bunch of stuff on it. Just put a little lamp or a book on it, and that's how you would stage it. That will get you started upcycling. Thank you very much for coming today. I appreciate you.